Hey everyone, welcome to this webinar. My name is Simon Chadwick. I am Professor of Eurasian Sport at EM-Lyon Business School. It's good to have you with us again for our monthly gathering today to talk about sport and gender. May I provide a little bit of an introduction to how this will operate this afternoon, and then I'll ask our guests to introduce themselves. So, as I say, thank you for being here. We've got a set of questions prepared, which the guests have already been briefed about. But what we're going to do is to run this webinar in the way that it can be we can try and be as interactive as possible. And so what we can do as we go through today is, if you have a particular question or a particular observation, you're welcome to post those in the chat forum or else in the Q&A section. What I will do whilst people are speaking is I'll monitor the chat forum and monitor the Q&A section, and where relevant and where appropriate, I'll perhaps pick some questions out. But as I say, I do strongly encourage you to interact. I do encourage you to participate. And I think what today's session will do is to really to highlight some what I think are very, very important issues, and certainly having spoken to our guests already, hopefully we'll look at things in a very fresh and innovative way, and certainly some of the things that I've been hearing from our guests today. Certainly I learned something in the time that we were speaking about this. So for those of you who are joining and are unfamiliar with the underpinning question, essentially what we're looking at is the question, how can sport and education drive gender equality? Just to make an apology, for people who are watching, if you see me looking down, it's because I've got my other laptop down here. So I've got the questions on one laptop and I'm speaking to you here like this. So I don't want to appear rude. So I apologize to you if it seems as though I'm looking away. But the underpinning question for today is, how can sport and education drive gender equality? Before our guests introduce themselves, if I just say a little bit about myself, if I may. So in addition to a whole number of other things that I do, for several years, I was director of research for Women in Sport in Britain. So Women in Sport is a registered charity. I was director of research for Women in Sport and also a trustee of the charity as well. I was the only guy sitting on the board. And this was really interesting for me because I was the only guy sat on the board, that's one thing. But the issues that we discussed in board meetings, I suddenly realized as a man how little I knew or how little I appreciated about some of the issues and challenges and dare I say problems that females in sport sometimes encounter. And so on that basis, I'm particularly pleased that we're running this webinar today, because I think especially for some of the men in the audience today, there are some really important issues that we need to confront, to deal with, to manage, and obviously some things that need to change. And so I'm really, really looking forward to this webinar. I think it's very important. So without wanting to monologue for too long, which I've already done, I'm going to go straight across to Afraa, a longtime friend. So welcome today, Afraa. And can I invite you, Afraa, just to spend 2 or 3 minutes telling us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and your journey. How did you get here?
Hi, Simon. Thank you for having me. My name is Afraa Noaimi. I'm the Executive Director of Josoor Institute. Josoor Institute is a legacy project created by the Supreme Committee for Delivery and Legacy, with focus on upscaling human capital, especially in the Arab and MENA region, to take part of the delivery of the FIFA World Cup in 2022. Being a Qatari female executive working in a sports and event industry, I echo what you said about the challenges we face in that industry. And I hope today I'll be able to add value by sharing my own experience and thoughts around the same subject.
Okay, thank you, Afraa. Thank you for that. And Dahlia, to you, the same introductory questions.
Good afternoon, Simon. Thank you for the introduction. My name's Dahlia and I'm Leadership Development Specialist. I work for a program under Education Above All. It's Al Fakhura program. And we work specifically to provide higher education for marginalized youth in Gaza, the West Bank, and Syrian refugees across the MENA region. Under that, mainly my focus has been the last 4 to 5 years is working on designing a civic engagement program where students go through a process of training over 4 years where they become civic-minded, positive citizens who gain a certain skill set, develop social emotional learning, and hopefully change the communities they live in for the better.
Okay, thank you, Dahlia. Matthew, same again to you.
My name is Matthew Barrett. I'm the founder of GoalClick. GoalClick is a global football storytelling project where we find people from all over the world and we ask them to tell their own story from their own perspective through the lens of football, armed with initially a disposable analog camera and their own words. So I went from thinking of this idea, a slightly crazy idea initially, and finding people in the likes of Sierra Leone and Iraq and Peru in the very early days into now running the project across over 100 countries where we find people from all backgrounds and all walks of life, from refugees and people affected by war, all the way through football fans, through the amateur game and up to the professional elite side of football. And of particular relevance today, around 60% of our stories come from the female side of the game. Boys and male football is our minority set of stories, which is unusual, I think, for the game of football in particular. And a few specific projects just to quickly call out that we have worked on. We did a project for the Women's World Cup, where we worked with around 50 women and girls from all around the world, from grassroots right the way up to 20 players who played on the pitch in France last year, and getting them to give a real intimate look into their lives and the challenges of football at all levels in all countries. And I can expand a bit more in that throughout the webinar. We also worked with the Supreme Committee in Qatar, looking at Qatari football culture in the nation ahead of the forthcoming World Cup. So in short, we're giving a platform to silenced, unheard voices, untold stories to help people understand those issues and those people around the world. And quite often those are female voices. So that is GoalClick in a nutshell. And I will also put the link for anyone to take a look at in the chat.
Okay, you preempted what I was going to say, Matthew, which is, can you post a link? Just to say to all of our speakers, please feel free to post a link in the sidebar so that people can look at the work, look at the projects that you're involved in. I have to say that as somebody who has visited Qatar regularly, I do actually have quite strong views about Qatari football culture. And what caught my attention about Matthew's project in particular was the story that it's told, which is a story that is very often not told, certainly outside Qatar. So, as I say, I invite all of our speakers today as we go through the session to post links to the work that they're involved in. So, thank you, Matthew. Anthony, you next.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks to all the colleagues for inviting me to come along. I'm Anthony MacDonald. I'm the head of office and senior program manager here in Qatar for UNICEF. I've worked for over 10, 12 years with different UN agencies, but over 10 years with UNICEF. And I've worked in most continents, including Latin America, Africa, Asia, Middle East. It's nearly 10 years now since I've been working here. And a lot of the work that we do is focused on how we can put children's rights at the center of decision-making that we do. And not least, sports, using development projects, programming to achieve this is one of the key objectives. And in recent years in particular, UNICEF has put together a huge partnership and teams in order to put and use sports at the heart of driving the agenda for children's rights around the world and achieving the SDG objectives. So I'm very happy to be part of this today and to listen to colleagues from other organizations, participants, to see how we can develop this idea of how gender equality can really drive women's rights, children's rights, in particular girls' rights. Because one of the things that as UNICEF we're very focused on is really looking at the most marginalized in the world, the most vulnerable groups, which are often don't have a voice, and how we can support them, empower them, to really give them a voice in order to engage, and making decisions about their own future. So we're very interested to be part of this discussion, and in particular to tackle this whole issue of gender equality and inequality, particularly in this region as well. So very happy to be here today.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you. Honey.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, everyone, for the great introduction. So my name is Hani, actually, and that's my real name. I'm Palestinian. I grew up all my life in Palestine. Actually, I founded women's football in the country, and I was the first ever captain to play in the team. And of course, a little bit of background. We started from nothing. We had a lot of barriers and challenges, from political to social to cultural, and how we managed to, look forward for a better future through football. And football gave us the hope, gave us the opportunities to break down our barriers and to be all against the odds. And that's a story I carried within my career until I started working for FIFA 8 years ago as a corporate communications manager, using also the FIFA's platforms to empower girls all around the world through our different programs among the 211 member associations, but also through the FIFA Women's World Cup and other tournaments, and the legacy that football leaves behind in each country, wherever we go, to empower girls and give them opportunities to dream for a better future. Because this was also a dream for me, and through football I managed to break down all these barriers. And I believe if I managed and the girls in Palestine managed to do that, nothing is impossible, and a lot of girls can have the dreams and make them true and move forward in their lives despite of all the difficulties. So hopefully that with this session we can discuss how we empower more girls and how we achieve gender equality. And I wish that one day we will not talk about gender equality, because then equality will be for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Honey. Thank you for that. So I think, as you've obviously seen, we've got a diverse group of people with incredible experiences. So I hope the webinar will be interesting in that context. But as usual, one of the things that I love about these webinars is they force me to think. And I'm sat here reading the questions already, and the use of the words girls and women. So if you notice, I talked earlier about females. But we're going to talk about girls and women. But this has immediately led me on to thinking about males and boys and men. So if you see me sat here thinking as our guests are talking, it's because I'm also contemplating the issue around males and boys and men as well, and what the differences are between boys and men. So that's really interesting, really interesting. Anyway, to you, Afraa, if I could start with you, and we've worked together, and obviously you're leading the Josoor project. In that world that you're working, what are the big issues? What are the big gender issues that you see coming up over and over again? And I know that one of the things that Generation Amazing and Josoor wants us to talk about is to think about those issues that you're going to talk about in the context of COVID-19 as well. So I guess the question which I'll be asking everyone is, what are the big challenges, what are the big issues in your world right now? And how has COVID-19 impacted upon them? Afraa.
Well, look, Professor Simon, the main challenge girls and women are facing is gender inequality, and it comes in different ways and forms, whether in early stage and childhood or later on in adulthood. And there are many data pointers that remind us of this challenge and the urgency to direct efforts in addressing it. We have a colleague here from UNICEF, and there are a lot of data from UNICEF, for example, point out that girls worldwide aged from 10 to 14 spend 50% more of their time on household chores than boys of the same age. Another UN data suggests that women spend 3 times more time than men in unpaid care and domestic work. Data also shows that MENA is the region with the lowest rates of women in management position worldwide. There are other data pointers that show disparity in the gross national income between men and women across the world. More specifically, in a sports and event domain, women's salaries, for example, in sports are way less than male. Taking, for example, female professional athletes, they have significantly lower salaries, fewer sponsors, less media attention than men's. We are not necessarily suggesting a correlation between more time spent working on home tasks at early age and lower salary in adulthood, but the data remains striking and relevant to the theme of gender inequality. When it comes to a crisis such as COVID-19, women are naturally affected more than men because of their capacity to absorb economic shocks is less than that of men, coupled, of course, with managing the responsibility at home front with family and children. There is a very interesting calculation done by McKinsey, estimates women's jobs are 1.8 times more vulnerable to the COVID-19 crisis than men's jobs. Although women makes up only 39% of global employment, but yet accounted for 54% overall job losses during this pandemic. And when I speak about data and percentages, I'm not only speaking about the east side of the world. That includes also the MENA region, and I think the female employment segments were badly affected by the COVID-19. On the other hand, I believe COVID-19 introduced a new way of working, which is basically working remotely, and that can be looked at as a solution for some females that are not able to have a full-time job.
Okay, I think we've just momentarily lost Afraa. Afraa, you're back with us. Sorry, Afraa, you froze a little there. Could you just go back to the last couple of sentences that you said so we can hear them again?
The reason of highlighting those data is that because MENA region is part of that calculations, and I think the female employment segment were badly affected by the COVID-19. The only side, the positive side, I would say, of facing that pandemic was the introducing of the remotely working approach to business, and that, as I said, can be looked at post the pandemic as a solution for some females who are not able to have a full-time commitment due to motherhood or other responsibilities that female tend to have.
Okay, thank you, Afraa. Could I just ask you, Afraa, is there a specific agenda within Josoor to address some of these issues around gender equality and gender discrepancies?
I think for Josoor Institute, the most important element that we're using to create that change is education. As you know, event and especially football is traditionally looked at as a male domain sector. So we're trying to empower female by giving the right education programs to have a better opportunities to compete and have a better opportunities later on life in equal opportunities with men.
Okay, thank you, Afraa. Dahlia, moving on to you and to ask the same questions. What are some of the big issues, some of the big challenges you're currently facing in COVID? When we spoke yesterday, when we were preparing for the webinar, and you told me what you do, I thought, whoa. So say it again. Say what you said yesterday, because I thought, wow, this is really interesting work.
So do you want me to tell you a little bit about the program that we work on?
Please do. Yeah, tell us a little more about your program, but yes. As I say, then move on to talking about what some of the issues and challenges are that I think the program in particular addresses.
Okay, so just also, I don't want to repeat too much of what Afraa said, because she's covered the majority of obstacles that have been faced, that are faced with women in the MENA region. But what I want to say before I tell you a little bit about the program is that obviously when we're talking about a whole region, so when we're working with, for example, we work with 18 plus, so we're working with youth in higher education. The obstacles faced by girls, for example, in Gaza are very different to the obstacles faced by boys in the West Bank. And so you'll also know that, the majority of dropout rates are actually for boys attending schools, 15-year-olds in the West Bank, due to the occupation and safety of attending school and the numerous checkpoints. And again, when we work with Syrian refugees, the obstacles faced in Lebanon would be different to Jordan, just mainly because tensions in Lebanon are very different, the host and refugee community, to issues in Jordan. So what we have to do with our program, the first thing I just want to stress, is that we have to contextualize to the region that we're working in and really understand it from kind of a bottom-up approach, so we get to know our students. They know their obstacles and challenges better than anybody else. So the program, the main aim behind the civic engagement program, which we give them over a period of 4 years. So imagine you're a student, you're 18 years old, you've been awarded the Al-Fakhura scholarship, you come in at the age of 18, and in your first year, you take part in a civic engagement program that's tiered over 4 years. And the vision behind it is to enable students to reach their full potential, like self-actualization. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we want them to reach their full potential despite the obstacles of living under siege, despite the obstacles of the political and socio-economic environment they live in, because we may not be able to change that, but they need to understand something that Honey mentioned before. You had it through the football, you had a vision for hope. You could see that there were changes, there was a hopeful future coming, and that you could work and build towards that. And what we do is we provide them over a period of 4 years with 21st century skills that they need to be positive global citizens, social emotional learning, and also a journey of empathy where they can begin to understand and relate not only just with other cultures, because often we look at it where it's the MENA region trying to showcase an image to a Western imposed perception, when really we saw from the Arab Spring, when dictators fall, it's dog eat dog. And it's like that we need to first build strong communities. And how we do that is, I don't know the community better than the student living in the community. So if I can give them the skills, they can then go out, identify their obstacles and their challenges, and they have the skill set to be able, with our guidance, to be able to create solutions for them that are actually sustainable and scalable. And at the same time, you're building confidence within them. And one thing I just wanted to point out is we saw this, it was very evident during COVID, is that we've been working with these students. We started in Gaza and then expanded to the region, but we were working, so we've been working with them for the past 5 years. And what was amazing during COVID is, Afraa mentioned some of these obstacles. So you've got obstacles of girls, they've got the increase in household chores when they're staying at home. And, it was all over the world, like increase in domestic violence. But if we're just going to talk about education, it's the access to education. You're talking about online learning, but, on 4 hours of electricity a day, how does that work? With households of 8+ people, how does that work? How are you concentrating with your siblings, with people around you? And also some of our students are, extremely on the marginalized, the extreme marginalized end of the spectrum. So they don't actually have access to the internet. But our students got together and they created, because they already have their own community from the civic engagement program, they began to access their colleagues and their peers who didn't have access to the internet, would download lectures for them and then pass USB sticks around. So they already have that initiative in them, and it's very evident that they can think of the solutions better than we can. So I think, that's just the one thing I want to stress, is that we really put them at the heart of the program. And often, let's label it as non-formal education or soft skills, isn't embedded within traditional education, not seen as important. And I'm not sure, I know that with sports, we're pushing for it now, but we've also seen that our students have changed the mindsets of their families who originally would not let their female members or their daughters attend sports activities, but because they have trust for the program, they have trust for the implementing agencies and for the community that's built, we now have, like, you know, all the girls who are also attending sports activities, whether horse riding, football, swimming, but again, we've accommodated to the cultural needs of the region. It's not imposing our version of it. Sorry.
Okay. No, thank you, Dahlia, and thank you for all your passion and enthusiasm. Matthew, I guess compared to Afraa and Dahlia, who are coming from similar kind of perspectives, from an educational perspective, you're coming from a different angle. So from your world, from your perspective, what issues, what challenges are you seeing?
I think I'll probably answer this from a bit more of a long-termist view rather than kind of 2020. And I think I'm often asked why we focus so much on girls and women and giving girls and women the chance to tell their own story. And that's, quite frankly, I often say because the stories are more interesting, and that's because there's always more barriers and there's always more challenges, and those challenges are almost a foundational principle on what GoldClick is built upon. And that's because of the inequalities involved everywhere around the world. This isn't just, you know, in countries where we've covered women and girls sport like India and Pakistan and Nepal and Iraq. This is, you know, across the whole globe, every single country. I think there's one thing, again, I often say, you know, men do have hard lives, and men are struggling, and they have great stories as well. But in every single country, there are more barriers and more challenges put in the way of girls and women to play football. And also, very importantly, without getting too meta, the chance to then talk about those challenges. That is also a massive barrier. So you're almost in a self-repeating cycle, that not only is there massive inequality, but then there's inequality about talking about that inequality. So we find it incredibly powerful to get that first person perspective from the girls talking about the challenges they face. Now, going to more specifically, and this was the case in our work in Qatar, as well as our work all around the world during the Women's World Cup. The huge challenges and the huge discrepancies in investment, in facilities, in infrastructure, in pay, obviously, at all levels of the women's game, clearly is something that is improving slowly, but is still, you know, there's so much work to be done. And it's really surprising that even within the women's game itself, from a more professional perspective, there are massive discrepancies between the elite sides and teams that you would think would be quite close to those levels. So this is a problem not just between the men's and the women's game, but also within the women's game as well. So in terms of a COVID specific, I see COVID as the great amplifier, to be honest. And I think that all existing issues are magnified and amplified by COVID. And you're seeing that women's sport and the return to women's sport is not being treated equally as men's sport. And again, we're into this cycle of inequality breeding inequality. And I think that is what kind of COVID is doing at both grassroots and elite level of the game.
Thank you, Matthew. That's a very interesting point about amplification that we could probably talk about in a completely different webinar, but thanks for making it. Anthony, from your UNICEF position, are you seeing the same things, or are you seeing different things?
Well, I don't want to repeat what colleagues have said. I think the colleagues have really honed in on some of the detail of what those barriers are. But I do agree that, you know, COVID has amplified what have been already pre-existing conditions. But at the same time, they've offered up opportunities. But one of the key things that, I mean, maybe just to take a step back and avoid repeating what colleagues have said, we as UNICEF in the Middle East, North Africa region are looking at we did an analysis across different sectors with governments all around the region, and we found that in MENA there is what we call MENA Generation 2030, which is really that there is to put a positive spin on this, there's an opportunity here, which is that there's a potential for a demographic dividend within the Middle East, North Africa region. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is that in the first half of the 21st century, there's an unprecedentedly large proportion of the population will be in their most productive years, which opens up the potential for a demographic dividend where these young people who can contribute to the overall economic, social success of this region. If we tap into that potential, it could yield a dividend for the entire region, particularly for the most vulnerable within the region, that we may not have an opportunity in future if we don't latch onto it. So essentially between now and 2014, this huge opportunity, because of the youth bulge that we talk about in the region, there's a potential that if we actually tap into that and address some of these deep-rooted inequalities, particularly around women and girls who form a big proportion of that population, the yield can be for countries, for individuals, for rights, even for the economies, could be huge. However, within the evidence that we see in this region, we see four major barriers to being able to unleash this dividend for the region. One is political and social stability. The other one is inclusive and equitable economic and social policies and expanded employment opportunities. So actually closing the gender gap in the youth labor force would, if these were addressed, would unleash human capital to contribute to economic and social development within the region. And so this is really, really important. So if we position these as, and they're all interlinked, none of them can be looked at in isolation. And I noticed many of my colleagues today in the webinar, interestingly, mentioned in one way or another, these kind of reaffirmed these four big barriers, interlinked barriers of economic, employability, social, cultural, human capital, policy, legislation. And they mentioned specific examples, and the figures are quite staggering, where we have a huge unemployment rate between 15 and 24-year-olds, which is huge, quite a large figure. Women are more likely to be paid less, etc., all these things. But what I want to perhaps emphasize is that if we actually work together, and we do need to work together, and are able to address some of these barriers, the dividend can be huge. So even despite COVID, which, as I agree with Matthew, has amplified some of these, but there's been a lot of progress. So if actually we latch onto this and we build on it, the dividend could be huge for this region. So, and I think maybe that's a point I want to stress, that whilst there are these huge challenges and there's still a lot to be done, the return on the investment in addressing these inequalities that we've all talked about could be an opportunity that we might not see for decades to come if we're not able to piggyback on what this potential dividend is yielding for us in the region.
Thank you, Anthony. And finally to you, Honey. And I'm going to ask once you've spoken, Honey, I'm going to ask everyone a question. Something that, as I've listened, has occurred to me. But please, Honey, from your perspective, the problems, issues, challenges, especially in a COVID-19 setting.
I think my colleagues have covered everything, nothing really left to talk about, but actually I would highlight one issue that still remains and we are still facing, whether before COVID or during COVID, or maybe it will still exist after COVID, is a women's leadership in sports. And most of the decision makers are men, and when we would like to embrace sports and give opportunities for girls and tackle the challenges and the difficulties they face, whether it's from political, social, cultural, etc., most of the decision makers are men. So that will make the development of women and girls all around the world very slow, because when women don't take part of the decision, then the girls will not have the opportunities to move forward, whether in politics, in sports, in education, etc., etc. So I think this is a big issue that's facing the world today, that we need more women in decision-making positions. We need more women to be on the table and have a voice, and to be part of the discussions, and to embrace policies and rules that also tackle women in particular. Because if just the men only taking part in decisions, then equality will never happen in this regard. So I believe this is a big issue that we should focus on, and we should tackle for the future, and encourage organizations, member associations, governing bodies to include more women, in order to tackle also diversity and inclusion and equality for all. And now the world is changing. We are in 2020, and we still lacking women in high positions. Also, of course, then it comes the women representation in media, the women with the sponsorship, and how media representing women at all levels, the lack of representation as well in sponsorship, for example. We have witnessed throughout the World Cup recently, just last year, the success that women have achieved so far for the last 5 years, whether in sports or many other fields, and the success that happens actually was a great step forward for the women's game and for girls' participation at all levels. But unfortunately now with COVID-19, the outbreak, the pandemic has made it even harder to know what will happen after the pandemic, because now most girls are sitting at home, they don't have opportunities, domestic violence is increasing, access to internet is hardly possible. Of course, we are not talking about here women in particular, but also like minorities. We have to mention also refugees, immigrants, disabled people. In such COVID-19, the challenges are much harder even, and to recover from that, it will take time, and it will take responsibility from all different sectors, from governing bodies, from governments, from politicians, to move forward, because the focus now is on the men's sports and how to recover the men's sports, particularly in football. All the clubs and the leagues and the federations, they focus on how to get back to men's football, and women here is marginalized because it's not a priority. So as far as we don't have women as a priority and girls' participation in sports as a priority, things will not move forward the way we want to see it. Of course, there are reports talking about women participations. For example, FIFPro, they said just 18% of female footballers are professional, also like in terms of economic and how they are paid, and how now their contracts are cut, mostly the first, rather than men, because as I said, the focus already is on men. And also, if we're talking about women representation in media here, we can say that 90% of the sports editors, reporters are men, actually, whether it's in Champions Leagues or in the Olympics, Tokyo 2020, postponed, of course, but the representation of women in media also, it's at risk. While 40%, for example, of all sports participants are women, women's sports still receive only around 4% of all sports media coverage, according to UNESCO report. So such challenges that we are facing still in the world of inequality and I would say injustice for women and girls all around the world will make us have more responsibilities to move forward, have more policies and regulations. And I think the only thing that helps in this regard is to ensure that we have policies and regulations embraced, because we can have the talks forever about women's rights and equality and gender balance, etc. But if we don't have policies and regulations to implement and to embrace, things will not change, because the percentage is very low. I mean, if we talk about 211 member stations for FIFA, only three presidents are female, and very few are secretary generals, for example. So if at the moment still the men are the decision makers, and once men are only the decision makers, women's rights and gender equality and equal pay and all these talks and issues we are talking about, it will take much time to change. So therefore we need women in such places, in leadership positions, to increase the participation for girls in sports all over the world, and to give them an opportunity, because opportunities are great for them to embrace their talents and their education and their leadership skills, because there are a lot of potentials. And that's why when we talk about diversity, we talk about it in all levels, representation at all levels for both men, women, regardless of the backgrounds, nationality, ethnicity, because that's why we can have the best outcomes, because research has proved that when we have women represented in management or in decision-making positions, the outcome is always much more successful and much more better. And that's why here the challenges can be tackled. Of course, it takes time, but we need collective efforts. Also, we need the men here, champions, to be the champions to support women in this fight, because women alone cannot fight the fight. Of course, we need men, the leaders, to fight for women in this battle, and to ensure that they also get equal pay, they get representation, to give them the opportunities to be represented and to have a voice and to be sitting on the table, and to have a balance between the two genders. So I think mostly I would say that was one of the most challenges that women facing now, which is the lack of leadership that they are given in different positions, whether in sports or at the other fields.
Thank you for, sorry, Anthony, go on, yeah?
No, it's just building on that, because I think it's important to perhaps, the key message here is that we keep on hearing how COVID has impacted and created a global economic as well as social crisis. And we're looking, everybody's scrambling around to look for solutions of how we dig ourselves up out of this crisis. Well, actually addressing these inequalities, addressing these barriers that I've just talked about, that we're all talking about, and we're all saying the same thing, will actually necessitate addressing the issue of gender equality. And that applies to both men and women, because gender is about both, as you've just said. But actually addressing these barriers and putting gender equality at the heart of our agenda, or recovery plans and agendas and policies, investments, economic, social investments, is actually critical to addressing many of the economic and social issues which are the result of COVID. So very often we're scrambling for new and innovative ideas because of COVID, but actually the solutions are staring us in the face, which is to give women, men, women of all walks of life, especially those who are the most vulnerable. If we can support them, empower them, and facilitate access to education, to employment, to skills, if we can do that, then we can all together build back better and address the very issues that we're trying to deal with as a result of COVID. So very often the solutions and those who are the key to the solution to that impact are staring us in the face. And all of them, all the courses, especially Hani now has very effectively explained it. So just to say that actually that investing in addressing or promoting gender equality makes both economic and social sense in a climate of COVID and the impact that COVID has had around the world.
Thank you, Anthony, and thank you, Hani, for that. Just to alert you, Hani, there are some observations and questions that have been posted in the chat forum as you've been speaking. If you do get the opportunity, honey, to answer those, not verbally, but in writing, that would be helpful. As I listen to this, there are so many things that go through my mind. The most significant of which, I guess, is we simply can't talk about the issues in a detailed way in a 1-hour webinar. This has got to be a conversation that continues and grows and develops and is pursued through other means. So I'm not going to ask any questions, even though I've got 1,000 questions in my mind. What I do want to do is I actually do want to move on, because we've got about 15 minutes left of the webinar, and given that it's my core business, and given that Josoor and Generation Amazing, it's also part of their core business as well. And I think it's important to ask this, and that's about education. And we have a question from Mohammed, who also is asking about education. And so I think as we go through this last 10 or 15 minutes of the webinar, if I could go to you firstly, Dahlia, and ask you, in simple terms, what is the power of education? What does education do to address the issues that we've just been talking about? Dahlia.
Okay, well, first of all, if we're going to we're talking about formal education or non-formal?
You tell us, because some of us may be unfamiliar with what the difference is between formal and informal education.
Okay, well, I think Anthony spoke about it from kind of the MENA region perspective and the policy perspective. But if you're thinking about the current situation in the region, where you have, due to COVID, you've got an extra 5 million people who are unemployed, and youth who are unemployed. It's already got the highest rate of unemployment in the world at 25%. If I'm going to focus, when I'm talking about higher education, the purpose of higher education is to work towards bridging the gap for meaningful employability. So it's actually to ensure that, you know, the most marginalized youth in the MENA region have access to more meaningful employment in the future, and then can go on to build their futures. And it's the only way that you can break the socioeconomic, barrier, is by providing marginalized youth whose, for example, parents were not necessarily had gone on to higher education, with the ability to do that, and then their children also go on to more formal education. I think that what we forget as well is that currently it's only 1% of youth who have access to, refugee youth who have access to higher education. That's 1% worldwide have access to higher education, but we need to look at it as a trajectory. So as much as, for example, I'm focusing on higher education, we need to remember that when you've got children who are entering a primary school, they're more likely to go on to then continue their education to higher education, which helps them with increased employability. So I think that for us, the main focus is quality education. And in terms of not just access, but it's retention, we have to design and tailor programs that accommodate for their obstacles. And so we're targeting the obstacles in each region and the barriers they face to education to ensure that they continue and complete their education. And then with other organizations, for example, we've got Silitech here in Doha, work closely with them so that they can go on to bridge the gap with meaningful employment. But the other thing that I just wanted to mention when we're talking about traditional university degrees or bachelor's degrees, you also have to remember when it comes to Syrian refugees, a lot of them, when they fled, they left without the paperwork, without their high school certificates. So when we tailor to things such as vocational training, diploma, and things that can actually allow them to earn salaries whilst they're working.
Okay, thank you, Dahlia. Afraa, again, a lot of what Josoor does involves the creation and delivery of education programs. So in addressing some of the issues around women and girls, what does your education seek to achieve? What do your programs seek to achieve?
There is no doubt that sports and education are two significant vehicles that have the potential to drive gender equality across the world. And we have Hani here as an example for that. When taken into account also the challenges women face since early age, sports and education always been a tool to empower women to compete for better opportunities. Specifically in Qatar, the importance of creating, I believe, the local sports and event ecosystem for the human development and the economic development of our country as part of Qatar National Vision 2030 has an impact on our economy in general, but also in our society in particular. This has led to a specific impact on our women, not only by creating awareness on leading healthy lives, but also in finding new opportunities through various initiatives, education and professional. Qatar also has dedicated an annual national sports day where every member of our society partakes in the spirit of healthy lifestyle. The motivation, of course, gets further enhanced through witnessing the real growth of the sports and event ecosystem in the light of the upcoming FIFA World Cup, and for Josoor Institute being a project in intersection between the education sector and the sports and event. I think having such a project is already a significant step in the right direction to address the challenge of gender and gender equality. And the success of Josoor Institute at the end of the day will be measured by the degree to which we will have had an impact on the FIFA World Cup in 2022, but also in the success of our alumni in their career, as many of those will be women, and this will be, I believe, a significant contribution of Josoor Institute to the challenge of gender equality.
Thank you, Afraa. I'm going to move straight to you, Honey, and to ask you again, education. What do you see as being the power of education, or the role education can play?
Of course, education is very important because not only it gives girls and women self-esteem and independence and empowerment, it makes them believe that the future is theirs. And the more that we have educated women, the more the society is benefiting from the diversity that it has between men and women. So education is a key, as sport is a key, because the moment that we are all aware of what's happening around, we are all aware of our rights. And that's what is important, because I also meet women that they are not aware of their rights, aware of negotiating, aware of their abilities and their skills, because most of the jobs, if they apply for, it's men applying for the jobs with lots of confidence that they can do it, while women, they have to think too much before applying for a job, that they fit all the criteria and they tick all the boxes, and they also pressure themselves that they can't make it, or it's hard for them. So it's important that education helps to build their self-esteem and encourage them that they are to go for it, and they are able to make it, and they are able to succeed, and they are able to win. And the world needs women and girls to go for it and just have the courage and have the confidence, because a lot of things come out from insecurity and inconfidence, because we are vulnerable as human beings. But it's important how education boosts your confidence and how education gives you an opportunity to fight for your rights, and that's important for all women to fight for their rights and stand up for what they believe in, and make sure that their voice are heard. And wherever they have to face challenges, or they face sexual harassment, or discrimination at work, or injustice anywhere, or inequality in payment, education backgrounds and give them the confidence and the ability to fight for their rights and discuss it and negotiate it. Also, the sports has an important tool to bring to empower the girls all over the world. I mean, I can talk about my story, how sports made me the person, or football made me the person who I am today. I started just from nothing, playing in the narrow streets of Bethlehem when everyone told me not to play. My parents, the community, the neighbors, not only because because of the cultural norms or the social norms, but also the political barriers, the lack of infrastructure, lack of investment, lack of support, and all that didn't stop me to move forward and break down the barriers and believe that the sky is the limits and the opportunities will come. But of course, I got some support from the people who believed in my cause, men or women. So I think sports and education, there are two things we can't separate from each other, because at all levels they empower, they give a self-esteem, they give you independence, they make you unbreakable, and the resilience they offer, it's important. And I think it's important that we mention the resilience here, because a lot of girls and women around the world have the resilience, but they need to be given the opportunity to be in such places. They need to be given the platforms to move forward, because there are a lot of potentials. There are talented women, there are spectacular women in every different field, but they are waiting for this opportunity that the men can give them in this, and we are talking about that now, to explore their potentials and give them the opportunity to lead and to change different perspective and what's happening in the world today. I mean, in the COVID-19, we have noticed also women in leadership positions, the examples of the 5 women as prime ministers who led their countries to a better situations like Germany, New Zealand, etc. And it was women who were part of that. So education is important to give the self-esteem for all women around the world.
Thank you, honey. Sorry to interrupt you. Anthony, Matthew, my apologies. I thought it was important to let the women in the group speak and to give their views on this. We're almost out of time. What I would like to do is to ask the 5 of you a practical question, and I think it's a good way of drawing our webinar to a close. There will be some people here in the audience today who are watching us, who are listening to us, who perhaps aspire to work in this field, or maybe already are working in this field. And what they want to do is to design, to create, to implement programs that successfully address issues of gender or gender inequality and some of the other challenges that women and girls face. To conclude with, can I just ask you for one thing, really short and sharp, because according to my clock, we've got 4 minutes left, although we can roll over a little bit. Just really short and sharp. If you were telling someone, when I design a program, or if a program is going to be successful, it must do this, what would that thing be? Dahlia, you first.
Work on breaking down your own perceptions and potentially stereotypes that you may have during your upbringing of certain areas. Get to know your audience. You're not them and you don't live their lives.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you, Dahlia. Matthew?
I'd say 2 things. Make it relatable and aim to bust myths. So I say those 2 things. Football is a tool we use because you can frame very difficult issues in the world, whether that be refugee issues, women's rights issues. When they're told through the framework of football, a lot of other people around the world, a lot of casual football fans, a lot of ordinary public are suddenly intrigued and interested in a subject which otherwise they would not care about, being quite honest. So making something relatable to a wider public is very important. And then the myth busting exercise is, if someone is telling you something is done a certain way, the chances are there'll be a myth to bust. So kind of lean into to when people are telling you something isn't possible.
Thank you, Matthew. Anthony?
Yeah, can you hear me, Simon?
We can hear you.
Yeah. For me, there's probably more than anything. First of all, I think it's listening to the stories of people like Hani and being inspired by how she came from starting to and challenging barriers of playing football and working. I think people like and women like Hani are an inspiration to us all, and it's why we do this despite the challenges that we face and everything. So building on Hani's story and all the Hanis out there who have dedicated their lives to doing this, for me, the one game changer is ensuring that young people participate and are engaged in any response. And that means ensuring that young people are able to always be at the heart of any program, of any initiative, whether it's changing laws, policies, investing in programs, advocating nationally. Young people need to be at the heart of decisions which affect them. And that for me is the game changer. Once we are able to put young people and children at the heart of what we're trying to do, it really makes a difference. It really changes the dynamics. It's usually positive, and it's that game changer. And I never seen that more than in this region and around the world during the COVID response, where across many countries, we as UNICEF saw adolescents and young people taking action through volunteering by spreading information about healthy behavior and practicing, combating misinformation, fighting xenophobia and discrimination, providing support to their own peers on mental health and psychosocial, such as in Jordan, Brazil, and Syria. Young people were active participants in their own future, but they were also active participants in supporting their own communities, their own parents, guardians, governments in responding to this global crisis. So that for me is the game changer. It's the one key area that I wouldn't negotiate on.
Thanks, Anthony. Honey, we're almost we're almost over time. Well, in fact we are over time. So, Honey, short and sharp, one thing that you think people should know.
I think just one thing is like give opportunities. Opportunities are important because a lot of people, they have everything they want and the potentials they have, but they lack the opportunities. I needed an opportunity when I was young to embrace all my skills and expertise and become who I am now. If I haven't got the opportunity, I would never be anywhere. I would just maybe stayed where I am in the streets of Bethlehem playing football in the neighborhood. But because of the opportunity, I am who I am now. And I believe giving opportunities as organizations, NGOs, governments, governing bodies give the opportunities because everyone deserves a chance in life. Everyone deserves an opportunity to move forward and to build the future we are in with COVID, without COVID, and for a better future with no problems.
Thank you, Honey. I give the final word to our one of our hosts, Josoor, and to Afraa. Again, Afraa, from your perspective, if you had to recommend one ingredient that contributes to success, the creation of successful programs.
I think I would echo what all my colleagues said, and I want to emphasize on the importance of open communication. Have always open communication. As Dahlia mentioned, usually the answer is out there. We just have to be able to listen to it, and don't be afraid to have another gender on your table. Make sure that the female voice is heard, and by breaking this barriers between both genders, I believe that we will be able to overcome this gender inequality.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Really, thank you for all of your answers. And as I said right at the very start, for me, the measure of the effectiveness of a webinar is how many questions are raised in my mind. I actually want to carry on, but we've reached our time limit. But there are all kinds of things going through my mind. I'm interested to talk about some of the differences between girls and women. I'm interested to talk about some of the similarities and differences between girls and women in the MENA region. The MENA region is a very diverse group of countries where challenges and circumstances are very different. I'm also interested to know, are the experiences of people and of women in the MENA region the same as women elsewhere in the world? So in my mind, there are so many things to talk about, and I wish we could continue for longer than we've got available. So on that basis, I think from my perspective, I hope that today's webinar, for the people who've been sat and listening, that you can go away now and think, and that's something that I believe is very important, is just be able to step back and to think. And reflect upon what everyone here today has said. And I think it's easy to listen to people's words, but do you actually hear what they've said? And so I think as we leave this webinar today, it's been really great to listen to, but I really genuinely hope that the attendees and everybody involved has heard what has been said and can understand what this means in terms of taking all of our activities forward. You know, certainly somebody who works in education, I'm confronted with the kinds of issues that we've discussed on a daily basis. And this is something that I have to be open to. You know, I take your point, Afraa, about openness. I think openness is a very important thing, but also it's about moving forward, making changes, and demonstrating tangible progress. So it's something that I feel very, very strongly, very passionately about. So, can I thank all of our speakers? Thank you very, very much. I really wish we could have gone on longer. Can I also thank the people who've attended, most of whom have stayed with us. I think that's also a measure of success. When your audience stays with you, you know you're doing something right. And of course, can I say thank you to our hosts, Josoor, Generation Amazing, the Supreme Committee, and University College Football Business as well. So thank you. And wherever you are in the world, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Best wishes to you, to your families. I hope you can all stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.